Spoiler warning. As you can see on the screen, as you can hear from me, it was in the video title and it was in the thumbnail. This is your last warning. This is a spoiler talk. So please, if you haven't seen it yet, go see the movie, then come back here and we can have ourselves a little chat. Okay, Peter. Oh, baby. Okay, so at the time I'm recording this, it's the next day. I wanted to do this discussion right after I watched the movie, but I had to gather myself afterwards, and I'm still kind of in the feel / not quite there yet, so I'm gonna try to do my best here, but oh my god, man. So just general impressions of the movie before I go into specifics on what I liked and things that I disliked in certain characters and stuff. Was this the best Marvel movie ever made? I don't think so. Was this the best comic book movie ever made? Again, I really don't think so. Was this the best Spider-Man movie ever made? And as someone who's seen all the live-action Spider-Man and have had my sort of reviews / opinions about all of them and have favored Tobey so much and stuff, was this the best Spider-Man movie ever made? I can say that confidently. Hell the fuck yes, it was, man. Was this the most enjoyable Marvel movie I have ever watched? It certainly was, man. It certainly was. I did not see that coming. I knew I would be so happy from nostalgia and moments, but I didn't think my excitement would overtake what I witnessed in Avengers Endgame, and it did, bro. This was the best Spider-Man movie I've ever seen, and it is the most enjoyable Marvel movie I have ever watched. That doesn't mean it didn't have its moments, but the moments where it was delivering both fan service and great storytelling and an abundance of nostalgic characters and new characters and Spider-Man moments, I've never felt so excited in a movie before, ever, watching it in theaters. I've never experienced something like that. I was one who goes always opening night. I went opening night to where my area is for Spider-Man No Way Home. I did that for Avengers Infinity War, Endgame. Endgame, people cheered and clapped when all those incredible moments happened. I cried my brains out during Endgame and even hollered when certain thing happens, like Cap when he had Mjolnir and stuff, Hail Hydra, all those like little moments when Thor got Mjolnir again, Doctor Strange doing his one, all these sort of cool moments leading up. But I've never felt a crowd reaction or a reaction out of myself when certain things appeared on screen for No Way Home. I just went all out. I've honestly never felt that excited before to that degree when watching a movie. That was just, I made one sound, we'll go into that later. I made one sound that was like not even human. I'm like, where the hell did that come from? It made shit come out of me that I just never knew was there. So we're gonna talk about it, but just starting off, I want to talk about Andrew first, Andrew Garfield, that is, from the Amazing Spider-Man universe. If you're not aware on my opinion on him, I enjoyed his movies. They weren't my favorite, but I always said I thought he had the best Spider-Man sort of swinging and animations and camera work. I thought it was really done. Like, he had the most Spider-Man looking movements. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but you can kind of, I've always thought this. If you want to say he's the best Spider-Man, I wouldn't agree with you, but I wouldn't disagree with you. The only thing that really defines him as the best Spider-Man is honestly his sort of banter and quips and jokes. Like, there was one moment in particular in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 that I'm like, wow, that was so Spider-Man. Like, not just him with, like, the radioactive bottle isotopes or whatever in the beginning of the movie. And he's like, oh, got you. And he's, like, hanging upside down. I'm like, that's a Spider-Man type of scene. But when he was fighting Electro and he got hit to the ground, he's like, oh, shake it off. It's just your bones and your organs. And then Electro started hitting him and again while he was doing, like, his Electro theme and stuff, and he's like, oh, I hate this song. It was just, I feel like Andrew had a lot of good jokes for Spider-Man. Like, he felt like Spider-Man's more, again, quippy, jokey side and stuff. So I thought he really did well with that portion of the character. So when you add that coupled with how he swung, he web slinged and shit, he did really good in regards to that aspect of Spider-Man. Again, Peter Parker, what I think was like his lowest point for the movie. And obviously the script and sort of creative control things along those lines, but it was never necessarily coming back to him, because I always thought out of the three actors And this is, again, no discredit to the other two, but I always thought Andrew Garfield is the best actor out of the three. And going off that, when he's the best actor, I really did. I really did tear up a lot when he started talking about how he lost Glenn. He acted so good in that scene. I'm like, dude, he needs to like get an award for like supporting actor. That acting there was incredible. I felt his emotion. It passed on to me, and I could see the pain in his eyes and his face, and the way he paused and he like kind of shook. I was like, that hit me so much harder than I thought it was. But just going on more to the more positive sides, when he made his first appearance, the one thing I was confused by was Ned. I'm not gonna lie, I don't like that bit where Ned is just like, oh yeah, I'm magical all of a sudden. I wouldn't care if they sort of mentioned it in the previous movies, but literally out of nowhere, he's like, hey, Doctor Strange, my family's been saying lately that I'm magical and shit. And then he got his sling ring and was able to open the portal. He's like, find Peter Parker. I'm like, how does that work? But it's whatever. It brought the boys in, so I couldn't care. But I really think that's like one of the weak points of the plot is that whole Ned is magic thing. But it's just my opinion. But when he did it and stuff, and you look in the alleyway and you see a taller Spider-Man, because I said Andrew Garfield's the same height as Peter Parker, 5'10", but he looks like he's over 6 feet. But he looks tall for some reason, like really tall. And I saw the eyes, and I just instantly knew. I screamed out loud. I'm like, oh my God, that's Andrew. And I'm like, I didn't mean to not ruin it for people, because people in my theater were loud. If you're going first day, first showing like I do, it's an all-out war, okay? It's like an arena. It's like a football game or whatever, MMA fight, if you want to call it that. Like, anything goes. You can scream, you can shout, you can holler if you're not into that. Watch it some other day, but I was like, oh my God, it's Andrew. And then everyone was like, oh. And then he jumped through the portal, and everyone started going ballistic. And then he's like, no, it's okay, I'm nice and stuff. And then he took off the mask, and everyone erupted. I did too. I was kicking back on my seat and shit. I was screaming. I was so happy to see him. He was like, I'm not the werewolf. It was so good to see him again. And then he had to prove to Mary Jane, or I should call her Mary Jane, MJ and Ned, that he was when he stuck to the ceiling. Then he crawled to get the spider web out of the corner. I thought that was so good. And then MJ to Ned was like, can you find the real Peter Parker? And he's like, ouch. I thought that was funny. So I loved his interactions with all the other characters as well. I always said he had sort of really great Spider-Man banter, and it really worked for him. Somehow, again, there were always rumors that Sam Raimi and Mark Webb sort of had involvement in this when it came to their specific characters. I don't know if that means like writing or direction and stuff. So whoever wrote the lines for him, they fit Andrew very well. I'm almost like, this is what happens when you give an amazing actor a good script. Look at him. Look at our boy. Oh my God, I was so pleased by Andrew. And I really think if he had sort of MCU writing, was seen in a new lens, as I always said, he could have been held to a way higher standard. But the fact that he got, I even looked at sort of leaked video reactions after I got out of the theater to see how other theaters responded to him, and it was like the same response that my theater had, where it was all out cheer. So I love that people loved him, and that makes me so happy. And honestly, I don't know what my first sort of favorite moment of the whole movie is, but I do know what my second favorite moment is. It's when he saved MJ. I was so happy for him. I saw Tom diving, and I'm like, oh, dude, in my head and in my heart, I'm like, I really wish they would have made Andrew. But then Goblin hit him with the glider. I'm like, oh my God, is he going to do it? And then I saw him look, and he went, and then he dove, and I was like, yes. I'm trying not to scream loud because my mic will cut out, but everyone erupted in the theater, and so did I. And then when he actually caught her, I screamed so loud, man. I couldn't help myself. I was so happy for him. And to see that cycle come back around, I was beyond excited. And again, just all his little interactions and talking about, he's like, he's like, I want to fight an alien. I fought a like mechanized rhinoceros. It was just his banter and stuff was so good. I really loved him in this film. Even though his appearance was brief, it's just, I really liked this version of him more than in the Amazing Spider-Man. Not Spider-Man necessarily, but just when he has the mask off. So technically, even though he's in the Spider-Man suit, he's more Peter Parker, but it's just, I just really, really enjoyed him in this. And again, I just think he's such a talented actor that they really did him dirty with the sort of progression and outline for the two movies. I'm not really going to go into like the studio interference and stuff, but I really feel like he drew the short straw in that regard, and it sucks. It was wasted potential, but to see him sort of have not necessarily a second chance, but just one more time and a good time at it was just so pleasing to myself, and he had great moments. So I thought they handled him very well. The only thing I was surprised by in his regard was when he was still mourning Gwen after all these years. Not that he couldn't mourn her, but I feel like he would have moved on into a new relationship. And if they behind the scenes, I thought like the Amazing Spider-Man 3 would have progressed to where he met MJ. I was like confused by that. I'm like, so they just pretend like he encountered no more sort of love interest? And then same thing with Toby and him when they were talking about villains. Are they just going to pretend they encountered no more villains after their sort of final film? Or are they just sort of having them say dialogue related to the villains in No Way Home as to not spoil future films for Tom Holland? That's what I'm wondering. What I mean by that is, like, did Vulture appear in Toby's universe sometime down the line? Did Venom appear in Andrew's universe sometime down the line? But he said, I didn't fight an alien. He said, I want to fight an alien, but I don't know if anything progressed in that regard. So, I mean, since Doc Ock was there and they teased the Sinister Six in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, and obviously we saw the sort of tentacles, I feel like Andrew would have been able to recognize and say, like, yeah, those were on my Earth. I had to fight a guy like that. So, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Well, I really don't know if we'll have to wait and see, because that might be the end of them. Might not, maybe. I think it is, but Andrew was, as Toby said, he was amazing. And with that being said, I'm gonna move on to Toby in this, dude. I knew as soon as Andrew came, and then they're like, try to get the real Peter Parker. I'm like, that's right, the real Peter Parker. I'm not trying to throw a shot at Tom Holland, but everyone in the theater, no one spoke a word until he appeared. When Ned was summoning thing, it was like dead silent in the theater, but you can almost feel the energy of other people waiting in anticipation. I can't even talk. It was so surreal and stuff. And then you see sort of the silhouette of him, and then he stepped through and you just see him there. I lost it. That's where the sound, remember I said I had like an inhuman scream, a sound that I've never made before in my body? That's what came out. I don't even know where it came from. It was like the child that was long lost in me from my childhood was awoken once more and just let out like a weird ass screech. I was like, what is that? But I hurt my hand so bad clapping so loud. I stood up. There were people who stood up and were like roaring. I know that sounds like, oh my god, it makes the movie so unpleasant, but again, if you go opening night, you go there for a reason, and it's because I too wanted to scream, because I was screaming. I was giving up. Yeah, I'm not gonna say it though. I was swearing and stuff. I was like, he's back and shit. I was so happy. That was probably the happiest I've ever felt watching a movie, was that moment, just seeing him. I didn't cry. It was just, it was surprising. You'd think there'd be tears of joy, but it was just more so such a thrill of excitement that I honestly looked like the Joker. I had the biggest smile ever. It was incredible. And I'm going to tell you a little story about that scene in particular, because once it sort of, the theater calmed down, everyone went silent, then there were people making jokes and shit. And they weren't even that good of jokes. I think they were somewhat related to his Spider-Man, but obviously they weren't that good, because I don't remember what those people said. And of course, you have someone, as I was saying, in the crowd saying the joke, and then people are like, ha ha ha, laughing at his joke and applauding him. And then I'm like, I can do better. So I was sitting there thinking of it, and I'm like, should I do it? Should I say something out loud? Should I do it? And then I'm like, I'm just gonna go for it and stuff. And then I was like, where's my rent? And you know what happened? dead silence, and I was just like, and I melted back in my seat. I'm like, are you kidding me? Nobody laughed at that. I was like, what? I was like, I like turned to my friend, I'm like, Mr. DQ, how does no one laugh at that, bro? I was so mad. If you ever wonder why I love Spider-Man or Peter Parker so much, the character, and I relate to them, it's because it seems like they're doomed with having an eternity of everlasting bad luck, and that's pretty much the sum of my life. You have anyone else in that damn audience say that joke, say, where's my rent? They would have gotten applause. They would have gotten praise, probably put on people's shoulders, a bouquet of roses. Not me, though. Not me with my luck. I get dead silence. That's what I get. So, I was like, afterwards, I'm like, I could have seen that coming. Like, knowing it's me, ain't nobody gonna give me praise for that shit, bro. I have awful luck, but that's why I love Peter Parker. So it made me connect with Tobey even more, because he was always tripping in his movies and shit. But I'm like, only me. Only I could say a joke so perfect and then have just no sort of anyone recognize it or just laugh at it and just give me the dead silent treatment. I'm like, it's whatever, but oh, dude, seeing Tobey was so good. And then him doing this scene in particular where he showed off his web where he shot it, and they're like, dude, is that coming out of you? I knew something like that would happen, but it was just so good to see it unfold. They did the Spider-Man meme where they pointed at everyone. It was so good. But I love that little conversation he had with Andrew when he's talking about how he made it work with MJ, and he's like, oh, you'd be surprised, just give it time. And I loved his character in this movie. I wouldn't say it felt different than his sort of Peter Parker or humanity in his original films. It felt very much like him, but given that it's been so many years, he definitely feels older. I mean, obviously he looks older, but he feels older. He feels more calm and wiser and steady. And he also has a bit of, I felt like he was very humble in a sense. Like he was just a very peaceful character. It's like weird to say, but it's like, how can you not love him? But he really did. He felt like the older experience, but he was just so collected in just his manner and the way he was able to control the fight and not lose any sort of temperaments, or he was so rational, but it's what you would expect with experience and age. But I love that. I love his humility in there, and I thought it was executed really well. And just seeing him, especially in the scene where he caught when Tom was going to stab Green. I'll go more in depth on Green Goblin and Tom later, but just for the sake of Tobey and talking about him, when he caught the glider when Tom was going to stab him, when he overpowered Tom. Technically he overpowered Tom because Tom was really like trying to stab him, and Tobey was stronger. I'm not trying to start a debate, but I'm just saying what I saw. Tobey overpowered him, but that's not the point. I'm just saying. And he just looked at him directly, making direct eye contact. Didn't even have to say a damn word, and he got his message out. And I freaking loved that scene. It's falls exactly in line with what I was saying about his new, not sort of portrayal, but his evolvement and how he progressed and hit throughout his life. And it was just it was a beautiful scene to see, because I'm like, not only from a nostalgic standpoint of just seeing my childhood hero again, but just seeing him in such a new form that is both sort of respectful to his past, but also how he evolved throughout his character arc and throughout time, and just being, again, so wise. It was so exciting to me. And then you hear the and he was like, oh, when they made you think he died, it was oh my god, let me think. See, I'm already, look at my eyes, bro. That shit still hits me. They didn't kill him, obviously, but in that moment, I couldn't even see the screen. I was like, I literally sunk to the back of my chair, and I lost it, bro. I haven't felt that way in a long time. I'm not gonna go into like the tragedies of my life, but that sort of emotional response I have not felt in my life personally in years. And like I felt like my heart was beating slower, but it was beating way harder. Like it almost like vibrated my chest, like boom, boom and stuff, and my hands were shaking. I don't know if this is excessive for you, and you're like, oh my god, what's wrong with you? Why? It's just a fictional character, but it means a lot to certain people, and it means a lot to myself, so if you don't understand that, that's okay, but to the people who do understand that, then you, again, understand exactly what I'm going through, but my hands were shaking. I've never felt that way in a long time. Obviously, I was bawling my brains out, but he didn't die. He was like, oh, no, I've been stabbed before. I'm all right. I'm like, yeah, you are. You're a beast, but I was still like, whoa, like, man, I haven't cried that hard in a movie, and I don't even know, dude. That's easily top 3, might be number 1. I don't know, but I've just never felt that way throughout my body emotionally in years, so that hit me really hard. But just again, excuse me, my voice cracked, but yeah, just seeing him, and then that scene where he was like, oh, my back. I'm like, oh my god, he did it. He said it. Because in Spider-Man 2, do you remember when he was like, I'm back. Then he fell, hit the car, and he's like, oh, my back, and stuff. And then Andrew cracked it from the side. You could see their side view. That was hilarious. I died. That was so funny. For some reason, the chemistry between all of them, but in particular, Toby and Andrew, was so good. I could never have known that their chemistry would be so good. Man, if there was like some what-if universe and they could make a sort of not a cop buddy movie, but like a 2 Spider Bro kind of cop buddy movie. I'm like, their chemistry is off the chains. Holy shit. But I love them too, and it's not that I disliked it, but I just wish he had more moments in particular towards the end. Yes, Tom hugged him and said thank you, and I loved that moment. But when Andrew and Toby were looking at each other, and then they were just like peace, and then they faded at the same time. I wish Andrew faded first and stuff, and then Toby realized he had like one more second. I wish he would have just looked at Tom before Tom started talking to MJ, and like Tom looked back, and then Toby smiled like one more time, and the camera's panned on him with his eyes forward. It would have been a lot like, hey, he's smiling at Tom, but more so he's smiling at the fans who have been there throughout the years for him, and then he fades. I feel like if they would have done that moment, I would have bawled my brains out again there too, but I just wish something like that happened. And maybe it happened to my headcanon for how these events unraveled, but I just loved them throughout the film. And, what was it? There's another scene regarding him that I want to talk. Ooh! As I also mentioned when Andrew was saying, hey, Gwen died and stuff, and the acting was so good. But when he said, you know, I lost my uncle, when he was talking to Tom on the rooftop, and he's like, it was my fault. I was like, oh my god, they're talking about it and stuff. And then Tom said, my Aunt May told me with great power. And then he was like, comes great response. So I was like, oh my god, he said it! I was so happy. I was so happy for Toby, so happy for Andrew. And then one of my favorite scenes, I cried at this scene too. I cried in a lot of the damn scenes, but in this scene where it was Doc Ock. Oh, dude, I'm getting teary right now. See, I'm still like less than a day from seeing the movie, so I'm like still like, ugh. Especially since I like kind of downloaded some of the movie clips, but we're not gonna mention that. And he took off his mask and he's like, power of the sun, and then Toby's like, in the palm of my hand. He said, Doc Ock also said it in the beginning of the movie, but I'm not talking about the villains right now. I'll talk about them later. But when Toby took off his mask and he was like, Peter and stuff, and they started having a conversation, and he's like, my boy, it's so good to see you, and he's like, you've grown and stuff, and their faces and that interaction, I cried. I was so happy. I'm even getting emotional right now. I don't mean to get emotional on camera, but just seeing this and seeing holy shit, and seeing my childhood, because I told you guys, if you've watched my channel, I always used to watch those movies when I was a kid, like nonstop on repeat. Oh my god, bro, I'm like losing it. I'm so sorry. But obviously, sort of young adulthood, because that's like kind of the age I'm at now, versus childhood. It's like, obviously things are different. There are a lot of things. I'm not going to go into like the story of my life, but childhood for me was such a great time, such an innocent and amazing time. I really loved my childhood. And Toby was such a large part of that. As I said, he was my first superhero ever. My first standard on how a hero is supposed to act, perform, what they're supposed to do. And I tried to model myself after him. So And then seeing him, I always used to watch him fight Doc Ock in the bank and stuff, and on the train. And just Spider-Man 2 was, I think, my most watched film in particular for Spider-Man. So to see them too, I cried. And I cried here again, but just thinking about it and stuff. And he's like, you know, how you been, Peter? And seeing Doc Ock smile because he's back to Otto. And then Toby saying, I'm trying to do better because he's always trying to improve. I love that moment so much. Oh, it's so amazing. Oh, God, I'm so sorry for doing this on camera. But, again, Toby was my childhood. Just to visit him one more time is something I never in my wildest dreams would have seen coming. And I enjoyed it so much. And now everyone is saying there's rumors he might appear, but they were waiting for audience reaction to see if he's still, like, loved. I think that's rumors false and just more someone trying to fuel fan hype again. But if we could see him one more time, I would be so excited. But if this was his final appearance, then I thought it was done beautifully. It didn't really end off him in a sour way and stuff. It was just like another very nice appearance, so I respect that. And I really, from Marvel, from like Kevin Feige, from John Watts, from the people who orchestrated this, as a fan, in the bottom of my heart, I appreciate that so much to see him in particular one more time. Now, moving on to Tom Holland, again, I'm sorry with Toby. They just, largest place in my heart. And then with Tom Holland, maybe like a year ago, if I were to say, because you might be surprised by this if you follow my channel actively, if I were to tell myself a year ago that for the future of the MCU, your most exciting part, the part you were most looking forward to, would be Tom Holland's Spider-Man, I would have slapped myself in the face and say, you're a dirty liar. But that's the truth of it. For the future of the MCU, for the next phase, for the Avengers, for if there's Galactus, Doctor Doom, Kang, MODOK, whoever the villain might be. Also saw the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness trailer, but whoever the villain might be, nothing comes more than my excitement for Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And that's still unbelievable for me to say that. I never thought Tom Holland was a bad actor. I just didn't like how they shot him in particular as Spider-Man through like writing and directing and stuff. But I absolutely loved him in this movie. And I'm like, damn, Tom Holland killed it. His acting was so good in this. It's not that he was a bad actor, but just this movie, I was like, damn, he was so good. Not just from his acting, but his character. I'm like, they wrote him in a way that I can really, as a Spider-Man fan, get behind this. I'll admit, when Aunt May died, I didn't cry. I know it sounds bad. I felt really bad, but she was just never a character. And Marissa Tomei's portrayal in particular was never a character I was really fond of, because the whole hot Aunt May joke. And I feel like they made her look like, I'm not just trying to say anything, but she looked good in this movie. That's all I'm going to say, man. I know that sounds weird, but every guy is like, yeah. But she looked really good in this movie. That's not from like a, hey, like Toby looks so good in the movie. That's from a different kind of meaning there. But I'm not going to go into that, but it's just, from that standpoint, I can never really get into her character because I felt like she lacked certain great individual moments one-on-one with Peter, and also like the lack of Uncle Ben, not even mentioning her husband of like 3 decades. I just felt like off-putted by it. And then when she said the line, I always wanted Toby to say it to Tom, but when she said the line, I was happy that the line was said, but that she said it, I was like, it's kind of like when Taserface in Guardians was like, you know, it's a name that strikes fear, and then everyone was like, okay. That was like the same reaction I had when she said it. Even the people in my theater didn't really go berserk. They were just kind of like, all right, yeah, sure, this works, but, you know, would have liked to seen Toby say it, but it's whatever. But the scene in particular that actually made me tear up for Tom Holland was when Green Goblin absolutely beat the everlasting shit out of him. And I'm not trying to say that as like again, nothing about this is a jab at Tom, but he beat the fucking out of him. He demolished originally he demolished the shit out of him. It's kind of like with Toby. Again, Toby got his ass kicked by Green Goblin, and then he was like, me and MJ are gonna have a hell of a time. And Toby caught it, and then he started rising and stuff with his broken Spider-Man mask, then absolutely beat the hell out of Norman. So it started off the same way where Norman Osborn clapped the hell out of Tom. When Tom was punching him and Norman was smiling and shit, I was like, oh my god. And then he choke slammed him when he was punching him while he was on the ground, and then he choked him, and Tom was like trying to undo his hand around his throat, and he had blood on his face and he was crying, and you could see like his fingers like losing strength because he was being strangled. The acting in that was really good, but more so as a scene, it was so intense. I was like, damn. I said I wanted to see maturity in this film. I wanted to see more violence with like fights, and we got that, dude. That is one of the most sort of personal and emotional and intense fight scenes I've ever seen in a comic book movie. That was done incredibly well, and this is exactly what I wanted. I put it on my wish list that I wanted to see something like that, something that gave me the vibes of Spider-Man 1, and that's exactly what I got with Tom. And we'll talk about his fight later, but for now, just that scene where he was being strangled and losing sort of his life, you could see like he was taking his like final breaths. I was like, that really hit me. I was like, Jesus, I feel terrible for him. But everyone in this movie acted incredibly well. And I felt bad for him. Again, I didn't cry when Aunt May died because I didn't really have that connection to her portrayal. But again, I really still felt bad for Tom's Peter. And seeing him there, and then seeing the people trying to arrest Spider-Man as he's standing over her corpse and then shooting at him, I'm like, oh my god, this is awful. And then he went on top of the building where him and MJ used to go. And that's where Toby and Andrew showed up to go sort of talk to him about loss. And then I completely understood when Tom was talking about Goblin. And he's like, I want to kill him. I want to tear him apart and shit. I was like, damn. Dude, he did so good in this movie. And I love that he was like full of rage, but then it was Toby and again Andrew sort of talking about them about rage. I don't want to see you become bitter and stuff. I mean, obviously at the end of the movie, Tom did, and like Toby, when Toby rose and beat the shit out of Goblin, Tom did it, and I think he did it more. It was obviously different because, Toby would have continued, but Norman was like, Peter, stop, it's me, it's Norman. And then he was like, Mr. Osborn. So there was like that emotional connection there that like negated it. But there was nothing to negate Tom's rage because it was different. With Toby, he failed to kill Toby's loved ones. But with Tom, it was way more personal because he actually succeeded in that regard. Remember when he's like, Peter, Peter, Peter and stuff. He's like, you'll thank me for this. And then when he did the quick little look at Aunt May, I was like, oh my god. That whole scene with her was a little weird for me because originally I thought she got hit by his glider. I'm like, damn, he like cut her in half with his glider. But then she got up all fine. But then she's like, I'm feeling lightheaded. Oh, I'm going to collapse. I'm like, what the hell is going on? First of all, the bomb never hit her. And then she just passed out and apparently she lost a lot of blood. I'm like, I feel like her death was weird. I wish she would have stand up and like she would have gave signs as her being hurt, but she just seemed fine. I don't know. I just thought that scene was a little weird, but it's besides the point. But when Tom was fighting, when Goblin was just like punching him, I'm like, this is exactly what I want. I'm like, damn, the rage, the feeling of powerlessness that turns good men cruel. I don't mean to actually say a Batman v Superman quote, and you're probably shocked by that if you know my channel because I'm not necessarily a fan of Zack Snyder's movies or Ben Affleck's Batman, but it's just funny because it was really so full of rage and so personal for Tom that I understood that, and just seeing him act in that manner was just so crazy, and his facial expressions and the rage, and he's like, I wanted to kill you myself, and then when he started picking up the glider, and then he went to stab him, and then again Toby came and overpowered him and stopped him and would not let him do it. It was so good. But I love that moment because, again, it was Toby sort of reminding him of things and that these people can be cured because that's originally what Tom proposed. We don't have to kill them. We can cure them. These are people who have been sort of infected and they've lost their own free will. So to see him sort of remember that just by Tobey's look, the look in the eyes. I just love that scene. Absolutely love that scene. And then obviously with Tom making the hardest sacrifice, where he's like, well, like, what if everyone just forgets who Peter Parker is? Not that Peter Parker's Spider-Man, that Peter Parker is. And then Doctor Strange is like, it'll be like you never exist, you'll lose everyone, because Tom's already lost. Now he has essentially no parents, no guardians, and he's gonna lose MJ and his best friend. I was like, that's a Spider-Man sacrifice. And it's not that I love that he did it, but I just respect that he did it, because again, it's so in character for the character. And the fact that he's finally sort of coming in line with how I'm used to how Spider-Man should act, I was beyond excited for that. It was this very sad part, and I did cry and tear up when he was saying goodbye to his friends, because I was like, I feel so bad, because again, that's a sacrifice. That's the sacrifice that he's willing to make. Because again, just don't mean to hash out the line, but with the power and the responsibility that he has to others, and that's more of Spider-Man's nature, to be not self-serving, but this selfless figure, this beacon of hope, and to do what's right, and sort of live up to how people know the person he can be, whether it's Uncle Ben, Aunt May, and in this iteration, Tony Stark, but it's more so than him. It's just all others that look up to Spider-Man, whether it's the kids. Even in a non-fictional standing, as me as a kid, when I looked up to Tobey, it's that same thing of living up to the figure of who Spider-Man's supposed to be, because it's a hero in many different ways. And I felt like Tom, the directing and storytelling in this in particular, really set him up to be the, again, Spider-Man that I'm used to, and the one that I've always wanted to see from him. So when everyone forgot who he was, and then he went into the coffee shop with MJ, and he was talking and saying how she was like, talking about disappointment, and then he finished the line that she told her earlier in the movie. I was like, damn, I can see the pain in him. And then he sort of kept it back, and I thought he had notes that was explaining the entire situation to her, but then he put it away, and I'm like, I don't think he's giving up on her. He might be, but just to see him sort of take control of the situation and embrace the unknown and stuff, I was like, this is incredible. And then that scene of him moving into his shitty apartment like Tobey had, I'm like, that's Spider-Man, not having a ton of money and always getting evicted from his apartment and having to sort of live not a bad life as Peter Parker, but a less privileged one because of his own decisions and sacrifices. So to see him be like that with his apartment and feeling that, I don't know if there's music in that scene, but it felt very empty, but that added to it because he was alone. No one in the world knows who he is. So I thought it worked incredibly well, and it was like winter time. It reminds me of Hawkeye because it's winter time, and to see him there again, it worked so well. I'm so excited that nobody remembers he's Peter Parker, but it's a bittersweet because the people he cares about don't know. But that leaves the door for a lot of storytelling on where he could go now that he's in like college or whatnot. I think he's going to MIT. I was like, damn, what a flex. And then to see him when he was going to go, he had the kind of like Peter from Insomniac Games where he had the like police comms and they're like, ooh, there's a break-in or a robbery or some police activity going on. And then he's going to go jump out the window, but it panned to his desk. And there was a sewing machine and a Spider-Man suit. And I was like, oh, he's finally making his own suit. I've wanted this for so long out of Tom's, not to use Stark tech and not have Tony Stark hand him his suits, to actually handcraft, put in the work, develop his own suit with his style. It had the comic colors, the very bright blue and red. I was like, and then he jumped out and I'm like, the symbol's different. That's something I wanted, was a new symbol, one that wasn't given to him by Tony Stark, but one he personally made himself. And some people, I don't know if this is true or not, some people are saying it's sort of inspired on the front by Tobey's and in the back inspired by Andrew's. I don't know if that's true or not, but either way, it looks really good. And the scene of him swinging, using the move from the video game, and just seeing that, Spider-Man in wintertime by himself, nobody knows who he is, he's lost, he's more mature, lives in an apartment by himself. I'm like, this is it. I've waited so long out of Tom Holland, but this is the Spider-Man I exactly want to see. And I am beyond excited to see where it goes. I cannot stress you enough. I can't believe I'm saying it, but I'm so damn excited for him and his future, and just to see how this all unravels. And there's the potential, not that he's going to become my favorite Spider-Man, because Tobey will always be my favorite, no matter what, but sort of the best interpretation of Spider-Man in terms of accuracy, because we're getting there. I've always wanted a maturity Spider-Man, because that's what I'm more used to, with Spider-Man being more a man than a teenage boy, being in college or just living in an apartment and doing things by himself. And Tom is 1 foot in the door, and I'm so excited about that. So Tom Holland killed it with his acting, the direction. Absolutely loved all the characters in this, every single Spider-Man. But again, just Tom Holland. Again, it was centered towards his movie, as it should have been. And I'm happy that they did it. And I'm so excited for his final. It's still weird to say, because I never imagined myself saying this. So very excited. He killed it. Bravo to him. Bravo to Tom Holland. He definitely deserves a round of applause. And speaking of round of applause, when they were doing the credits, nobody really clapped during the credits. The only time they clapped during the credits was when Tobey appeared with the split, and it was like, and Tobey Maguire. Everyone clapped, including myself. It wasn't necessarily like downplaying the other two Spider-Man, but again, it was just Tobey appearing one more time. So good. Anyway, on to speaking about the villains and such. Dude, when I saw Doc Ock, I watched the first sort of clipping in the movie where, like, on YouTube, obviously from the trailers and stuff, we've seen clips of the villains, but to see Doc Ock there, and he said the power of the sun, and I was like, I whispered to my friend, I was like, in the palm of my hand. I was like, oh my god, he said it. And then the fight with him, between him and Peter, and then Peter took over his arms with nanotech. I thought originally he absorbed nanotech from the trailers and then used it against him, but it makes sense that sort of Edith overrode it. Right? Yeah, it was called Edith, right? Why am I forgetting that all of a sudden? Anyway, he took over his arms. I'm like, wow, I didn't want to see that. It totally makes sense. And just to have the conversation again and see Doc Ock, it was so good. And then to see when Green Goblin finally came and it was like Norman Osborn and stuff, and then them all talking. The scene in particular where they were all in the cells, every single one of them, and having sort of a conversation about like, wait, you're dead. No, you're a walking ghost. You died. And because they're all from the same universe, well, 3 of the 5, but they're from different points in time from the universe. So they're like, hey, I remember when you died. Well, I remember when you died. So it was just cool to see all these little interactions and stuff. I'm not going to specifically say them all, but of course I know exactly. I mean, I watched the damn movie, but it was so good to see them. And then when Sandman appeared and blocked Electro's lightning and thought it was like Tobey's Peter, and I'm like, yes, he's good. He's protecting him. And when Electro came and they subtly played his Electro theme, I was like, yo, the theme. I'm like, but then I was like, you could have played Tobey's theme there. If you're gonna play Electro's, you should play the Danny Elfman theme. I am aware they subtly used it in its conversation with Doc Ock, which again was a beautiful scene. I'm not gonna talk about it much because I'm gonna start crying again. But they subtly played it there. But I'm talking about the more epic orchestrated part where he's like swinging. His main theme where he starts swinging, and it's like I wanted that heroic aspect of the theme, but it's fine. We're good. Trust me, we're good. Again, but just seeing Willem Dafoe, I was like so unsettled when he was in Feast with Aunt May and he was confused. I'm like, obviously you know that he's either one playing them or two, Norman being in control is not going to last long. He was even wearing his damn colors, a green coat with a purple shirt. And, Willem Dafoe acted so good in this throughout the thing, but it really struck me when he's like, Oscorp doesn't exist, and he's like, I can't find my son Harry. And I was like, oh my god. And stuff, because I'm like, it sucks because Norman Osborn was never a bad guy. It was just literally the serum, as they said, a side effect was making him insane. So to see that more human part of him again, because even with all the villains, they were humans at one point. They weren't bad men. They just had unfortunate circumstances and bad luck, as Flint Marko said. originally in like Spider-Man 3. And I love that they sort of played on that, and Tom Holland Spider-Man was like, we can cure them, we can save them. The only thing was weird was like Lizard. I felt like not only did his new CG look a little weird to me, but I felt like his voice sounded a little different. I don't know if it was the same actor. Oh, before I forget, I wanted to mention, like when he was cured and when Sandman was cured, it looked like they reused the particular shots of the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 3, where in Spider-Man 3 where the water came and then he started to like melt, like his sand started to crumble to mud, but they like reversed it. And then when Lizard was cured in Spider-Man 1, it looked like they used the same exact shots from there. Technically, that's lazy. Technically, I mean, it worked for the sake of the movie because it looked like really good HD versions, but it does look like the same exact shot. But just as I was saying with Norman, and then seeing him sit with Tom's Peter and Aunt May driving to Happy's apartment, I was like, this is so bizarre. Or no, they were driving to the sort of Sanctum Sanctorum, like the underneath basement place. Because then Peter had the fight with Doctor Strange, and then he calculated like the inverted shit when he was in the mirror dimension that stuck Doctor Strange in a web. I'm like, damn. He was like, magic can't beat math, or well, science. But he said math, but I thought that was a really good moment. And then he stole the cube, and he freed everyone, and then they went back to Happy's apartment. I could never, in a million of years, predicted that all the villains would be chilling with Peter in an apartment. I would never have been able to see that come again. Well, never have been able to see that happen. Not come again, it's never happened. But, and then to see what's the bot's name? Dummy? That bot with like the three little things that always went, that Tony had in like the first 2 or 3 Iron Man movies, and Happy kept it. I was like, oh my god, that's where it was. But yeah, and then to see them work on it, and then they saved Doc Ock by making the new sort of, I want to call it neural interface, but like the inhibitor chip that gave him back his mind and let him be in control of the arms. Their lights turned back to white. So I was so happy for that. And then Electro put his thing on and stuff, but you could see he was power hungry. He could feel the power of the arc reactor. And even Sandman was like, I don't trust this, Peter. And then it was so weird with Willem Dafoe and him doing science. When he said, I'm something of a scientist myself, I said the line exactly as he said. I'm like, he's going to say the line, so I'm like, I'm something of a scientist, and he said it. Now the whole theater clapped, as did I. I'm like, he said the damn line. But seeing him seeing him there with Tom doing science and shit, and then he's like, if you ever feel like commuting across another universe to work at Oscorp, I'd hire you like in a second, or something along the lines of that. I thought that was so funny, but I'm like still like, oh, this guy. And then when Tom just like paused for a second, and like it was like almost like Hawkeye's deafness, where it was that muffled sound and like the ringing, and it's Tom's Spidey sense, even though he still calls it the Peter tingle. But I'm like, one of my biggest complaints with his movies originally was that he just had no Spidey sense. Not to the degree that Andrew and Toby had, because they had really good Spidey sense where they were dodging so much shit from the get-go, and I loved it. And it was such an early detection warning for them. But when Tom was going sort of ballistic with it and walking through the apartment and the camera was following him, I'm like, that scene is so cool and stuff. I'm like, something is very unnerving here. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, it's obviously, he's got to be detecting that Norman is not himself. And then he shot his hands full of webs. I'm like, he knew it and stuff. And then he did his turn and smiled. I'm like, oh God, here we go. But then he did his speech and stuff where he's like, we can be gods here. And then Electro heard that and stuff, and it's like Jamie Foxx's face like reacted to the words that like we can be gods here. Because if you don't remember, in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, he was like, I can be like a god to them when he had all this power, because he did feel like a god. So that really appealed to his sort of sense of power hungriness and his ambition. That really appealed to Electro there. So he took the damn thing off. And then Sandman fled, and then they zapped Doc Ock out the window. And then when, as I mentioned, when Tom Holland when his Peter fought Norman Osborn, That was a great fight. That was so gritty, violent, personal. It was shot very well. Very, very intense for the movie. And I appreciate that so much. Even Tom Holland spoke about that Spider-Man will punch in this. It was definitely a more violent movie. Definitely a lot of inspiration from Tobey, because Tobey had way more sort of gritty fights where it was sapped of music and shot very close with the Sam Raimi sort of camera style that they used in this film as well. And you could really see like the punch in the face, like spit coming out and sweat and blood. So I really liked that they did that. And yeah, when Norman was laughing when he was hitting him and stuff, I was just like, because Tom was going like, and then he was like, ah. I was like, oh my god. And then the scene in the end, he was like, was telling him you were the one that killed him, but he's like, but you were the one that killed him. And he was like, ah. Him doing his laugh and shit. I'm like, dude, Norman Osborn, Willem Dafoe in particular, acted his heart out. He was spectacular. One of the best Marvel villains of all time has always been Norman Osborn, but he outdid himself here. He honestly did. He was better in this than Spider-Man 1. He did so well in this. He was such a maniac. And more so, he was just such a thorn, essentially, goading, taunting Peter with throwing this tragedy in his face. I was like, oh my god, and then taking such pleasure in it. I always thought Willem Dafoe should have played Joker just because he's so good at acting and his laugh and stuff, but Green Goblin's essentially the equivalent of Joker to the Marvel Universe, so it works incredibly well. And if there's ever going to be another interpretation of Green Goblin down the line, good luck to whatever actor is going to try to outdo Willem Dafoe. Good luck, my friend, because I don't know about that one, but Willem Dafoe was absolutely perfect in this. He really was better than he was originally. So, again, just all the actors, Tobey, Andrew especially, Tom especially, Willem Dafoe, Jamie Foxx. I love Jamie Foxx in this. Flint Marko, Thomas Hayden Church. Again, I'm still debating if it was Reese Rice. I think it's Reese Ifans, but I don't know if it was him again, because it sounded a little different. We didn't really see his... Well, we saw what I thought was a reused shot from Spider-Man 1. Alfred Molina, again. Just everyone who acted in this movie did a superb job. And it's funny, too, because one of my biggest complaints always was the dynamic of MJ being Michelle Jones. I always thought it was Jonas, but it's Jones. And Tom Holland's Peter Parker, because it's ironic that they're dating in real life, Tom and Zendaya, but I never saw their chemistry in Far From Home. It just felt forced and awkward to me. I didn't see the chemistry there. I didn't feel like it was genuine and real. Probably because it was such a different direction from Homecoming, where she was this really socially awkward, introverted, keep to myself, and very uncomfortable in scenes. And not that that's a bad thing, but see her evolve, change her character completely in Far From Home, and then him having this sort of very strong liking for MJ when he, no one noticed her in the first one. I felt like it was very forced. And the whole idea where she's like, oh, my friends call me MJ. I felt like they were definitely pandering to audiences just out of their recognition of, oh my god, MJ, she's MJ. Oh my god, Spider-Man, MJ, Peter and MJ. I definitely felt like when I first saw Homecoming and Far From Home that it was forced and stuff, but I wouldn't say it's because they developed a lot more chemistry in real life because they've been together for longer, but it felt like they wrote her better in here, because that's one of my complaints, that Zendaya is a very good actress, but I just never liked her character in particular throughout the first two films, but I really liked her in this. And I'm like, when they were there in the coffee shop, probably because even she herself, from a character standpoint, is more mature, like she's going to college as well. And she also has a job, like she's not necessarily looking at it like these young, super young teenagers. They're more stepping into, I don't mean to be on the nose with responsibility, but taking up responsibilities, not just like, hey, I have to save people, but like real life. I got to pay bills, I got to work, I got to get a job. And seeing that in it, like a more mature, more real relationship, and not sort of act so like awkward and be like more genuine and realistic, in that light, I really enjoyed her character more. And then I'm like, I felt bad. I'm like, no, get back with MJ, because now I'm like flipping on the boat. I'm like, yeah, I want this to happen. So we'll see if she appears, whether or not she appears in the future. I'm sure she will. That sounded weird. Sure, she will. Yeah, I said that right. It's like when Susie sells seashells by the seashore. Just what I'm wondering is, obviously there's so many things to do with the future. I don't know, for like on the love side of Peter Parker, what's going to happen. Again, if MJ will stay, if we'll get like a real MJ that's like called Mary Jane, and then he'll be like, oh, I had a girlfriend, she called her MJ, and she's like, oh, I like that nickname. I don't know what they're going to happen. They're going to reintroduce Gwen Stacy, because they could do that. Obviously MJ appeared in Tobey's, and now she's somewhat technically here, so it's been long enough that they can redo Gwen Stacy, or they can finally do Felicia Hardy, as I've always wanted. Can we please get a damn Black Cat? Because apparently Anne Hathaway was going to play Black Cat in Spider-Man 4, which I was like, really? But she eventually played a cat for The Dark Knight Rises. And I know they were going to do Black Cat in The Amazing Spider-Man, but again, just like really seeing it evolve chemistry between Tom's Peter and a Black Cat, I would like to see. I really want to see Spider-Man chemistry with Black Cat, both in and out of the suit. That's what I'm talking about. So we'll see what happens. And since Felicia's more of a definite anti-hero with the stealing again, she's just like a rehash Catwoman. You can't even argue that. That's true. But it doesn't make her a bad character. So while considering that she's not non-heroic, again, more anti-hero because she steals and stuff and will sort of do crimes, but the fact that now we have a piece of the symbiote in the MCU, if we have a more darker Spider-Man while he's wearing the symbiote and seeing his chemistry with her, because they'll all be in black, I'm like, damn, bro, that could work really well. Because he would obviously be a way more darker and not like Bully Maguire, but he would definitely be a more out of character Peter. And that whole scene was a bit weird, where Tom Holland went to the MCU. See, it's weird because Venom recognized Tom Holland from the Venom Let There Be Carnage like post-credit scene. He recognized Tom Holland. I mean, he said that guy. So I'm wondering if he just recognizes Spider-Man, or he recognizes that it's Peter Parker, because now that there's a piece of the symbiote, is it going to recognize that? I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. What I'm wondering is because we have to assume Tom Holland's going to put on the symbiote, is he going to talk to him, or is it just going to be like a sort of dormant thing that slowly corrupts him, and then when it passes on to Eddie Brock, then Eddie Brock will hear like voices in his head? Or are they just going to completely cut that out and do like a new version of Eddie Brock? Because obviously Tom Holland has to have a job. I have to admit I missed a lot of the dialogue because of the cheering, the clapping, and sort of my own emotions, but I don't know what job he has right now. I would imagine maybe he works at the Daily Bugle like he does, and then that's how he meets Eddie Brock. Like I'm unsure about that, but I think it would be really cool if... See, I know they're going to make a Venom 3, and Tom Hardy said Venom will eventually fight Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and he even posted a damn picture about it, but will it be Tom Hardy? Because it's the same thing with Charlie Cox. Charlie Cox, Matt Murdock, which I'm going to start watching Daredevil. I haven't seen it yet. But he's in the MCU. Is it the same one from the show? Or is it sort of like a variant? Because Loki's variants, you see, some of them look like each other. So is it the same thing like that? Like Tom Hardy will be in the MCU, but it's a variant of Tom Hardy from the Venom sort of verse. But he's also Eddie Brock. So that's just what I'm wondering. Well, again, we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, I enjoyed this film so damn much. My most enjoyable Marvel film I've ever seen. I think the best Spider-Man movie ever made. And yeah, I talk so much. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. For those of you watching now, I'd love to see what you guys think about the movie. And sort of ask me anything about the movie if you want to, or just say anything, because I'd certainly love to come in and reply and have a little quick talk with you about the movie, because it's just so fun to talk about these things, and I would just enjoy this movie so much. And if someone could answer this question for me, because again, caught up in the heat of the moment with cheering and clapping, were Toby and Andrew looking for Tom? Because when Andrew got there, he said, "I've seen you two," when he talked to MJ and Ned. I'm like, what does that mean? And then Toby also said, he's like, I've been looking for your friend. I feel like he needs me. I'm like, how does he know that? Can someone explain that to me, please? Like, were they teleported there to the main sort of universe, like the MCU, and then Ned teleported them from somewhere in the city in the MCU to his grandma, or I think it was his grandmother's kitchen or whatnot. So if someone could explain that to me, I would really appreciate it. But anyway, like I said, hope you guys enjoyed. And until then, I will catch you folks in the next video.